Welcome to Doctorates of the Absurd, your provider of belief on demand.
Today, we are strapping in for what might be the bleakest, but arguably the most logically rigorous intellectual expedition we have ever attempted.
We really are. We're diving deep into the work of Philipp Mainländer, a 19th century German philosopher.
A name most people probably haven't heard.
Exactly. His influence was, well, it was massive for a fleeting time, and then he was largely forgotten. And maybe that's because his ideas are just too difficult to swallow.
I think that's a fair assessment. We're turning the spotlight onto a figure who was, a contemporary of Nietzsche, a devout disciple of Schopenhauer.
Right.
And Mainlander took the pessimism that really defined the intellectual era of 19th century Germany and just cranked it up to its absolute chilling limit.
He really did. He created this whole metaphysical system that is, it's breathtaking in its despair,
Right.
but also in its sweeping ambition. And it's all dedicated to one singular dark truth. Okay, so let's unpack the source material we have here. We've compiled scholarly analysis of his magnum opus, The Philosophy of Redemption.
A monster of a book.
A monster. We've got crucial direct quotations that really stick with you and detailed historical context that places him squarely in that lineage of German pessimism. Our mission today is pretty direct.
Go on.
We are deconstructing his entire bleak intellectual narrative. We're focusing on his stunning logic that life is not just flawed or difficult, but fundamentally worthless.
And that's not even the final point.
No. Furthermore, that existence itself is just the elaborate, painful means to achieve the ultimate cosmic goal, which is absolute non-being.
It's a completely radical perspective. Mainlander offers this comprehensive secular answer to the perennial problem of human suffering, which is exactly why his work captivated so many intelligent minds of his era.
He gives the universe a purpose.
He does. He posits a universe with a definite purpose, but that purpose is antithetical to everything we normally celebrate about life.
Right. And where does this whole journey into despair begin for the individual? It starts, like all good philosophy, with the existential itch.
The nagging question.
The nagging question.
Mm-hmm.
Why is human life so defined by suffering, by this endless striving and fundamental dissatisfaction? You might achieve a goal, you might find fleeting happiness, but within moments, you're striving again for the next thing. You feel that same internal lack. Why can we never be truly permanently satisfied?
And Mainlander and his philosophical peers in that whole post-romantic era, they had a very precise term for this specific tension. Weltschmerz.
Weltschmerz. Okay, we need to define this properly because it's the intellectual toolkit that Mainlander inherited. So what does it mean in practice? Why was it so dominant in the 19th century?
Well, it translates literally as world weariness, or a little more evocatively, world pain.
World pain. I like that.
And Weltschmerz is this profound, even crippling depression or melancholy that doesn't just come from your personal problems, a bad day at work.
Right. It's bigger than that.
It's cosmic. It stems from a specific cognitive dissonance, comparing the ideal state of the world, the way things could be, the way they should be.
Based on morality or justice.
Exactly. Driven by moral, aesthetic, or religious ideals, and comparing that to the actual painful, messy, and deeply flawed reality of the human condition. It's that constant, sickening realization that we exist in a subpar, fundamentally disappointing universe.
So it's that feeling you get when you realize humanity, despite all its potential, just keeps making the same terrible mistakes over and over again. Or that deep, sincere longing for justice is just constantly crushed by reality.
Precisely. And think about the cultural context back then. You have the failure of the 1848 revolutions across Europe, the rise of industrial alienation, the decline of traditional faith.
A perfect storm for disillusionment.
A perfect storm. So figures like Mainlander, alongside other radical pessimists like Edward von Hartmann and Julius Bonson, they became almost like cultural prophets of this movement. They validated that sense of universal disappointment.
But Mainlander felt they didn't go far enough.
Not nearly far enough. He felt they described that the world was painful, but they hadn't established the rigorous metaphysical why.
So if you feel perpetually let down because your lived reality is, frankly, garbage compared to what you idealize, well, then you're in the Mainlanderian starting block.
Yeah.
And that sets the stage for his solution.
Which is incredibly high stakes. The stakes are cosmic and they're existential for every single individual listening to us right now.
How so?
Mainlander's position is that the ultimate wisdom, the highest truth available to humanity, is the knowledge that life is worthless.
That's a bold claim.
It is. And he
Yeah.
says if we ignore this central fact, if we stubbornly cling to the illusion of happiness or the biological drive to live, we fail entirely to understand the universe's true, dark, and purposeful trajectory. We literally miss the foundational script of existence.
And the centerpiece of that script, the philosophical core that explains everything from the Big Bang to your deepest personal suffering, is something he termed pessimistic pandeism.
Yes.
And this takes a relatively common theological concept and gives it the most cynical interpretation possible.
And this is where we introduce the original victim, the entity whose pain established our reality. To understand Mainlander, you have to revisit pandeism.
So let's define pandeism. It's a combination of two opposing views, right? Deism and pandeism.
Correct. It's a theological doctrine that tries to solve that problem of God's interaction with the universe.
So quick definitions. Deism is God, the clockmaker. He creates the universe, winds it up, and steps back and lets it run.
Right. And pantheism is God is the universe. Everything around you, in you. It's all God.
Okay, so how does pandeism combine them?
Pandeism posits that God created the universe by becoming it. And in that very act, God ceased to exist as a separate, conscious, transcendent entity.
So he became the clockwork instead of just making it.
Exactly. And it's an elegant solution because it conveniently explains God's observable absence in the present world.
Why prayers go unanswered.
Right. And it simultaneously explains the source of the universe. But this is where we hit the Mainlander twist.
The philosophical sledgehammer that defines his whole system.
Because other pandeists, they suggest God became the universe out of positive motivations. Curiosity, maybe? Or a desire to experience the infinite possibilities of creation. Sunny speculation.
Mainlander rejects all of that.
Completely. He gives us a radically darker rationale. He argues that existence, even in its perfect divine form, was an absolute horror to God.
A horror. How can perfection be a horror?
Well, the idea is that an eternally perfect, omniscient being suffers from the torment of having nothing left to experience, nothing left to strive for, the endless, crushing tedium of perfection. God was so miserable, so bored with omniscience, so tortured by eternity that he sought immediate non-being, instant annihilation.
So the very nature of perfection made God suicidal. That is a staggering claim. But if God is all-powerful, why not just choose to cease existing instantly? Why this whole convoluted, messy, 13.8 billion-year cosmic process?
That is the genius of his logic, which we're about to get into. For now, just understand the motive. Because God couldn't achieve instant annihilation, he had to calculate a divine form of suicide. A cosmic deicide.
So here's our first hook. What if the universe was created not out of love or curiosity, but because God was so miserable, he chose suicide?
And that changes everything. The universe is not a beautiful act of creation. It is simply the debris, the scattered fragments of God's self-shattering deed.
And in this framework, the will to die that we all feel deep down is what's spiritually grafted into us by this original self-murdering deity.
That's it. Everything we see around us, the motion, the striving, the decay, is merely part of God's decaying corpse, driven towards its inevitable extinction.
And we cannot avoid the chilling echo of Mainlander's own life in this philosophy.
You can't.
He finished his massive 1,300-page philosophical treatise, The Philosophy of Redemption, and then
he committed suicide, age 34, reportedly using a pile of his newly published books as a platform to hang himself.
it provides this literal physical commitment to his intellectual conclusion that is almost unheard of in philosophy.
It's not just theory, it's a terrifying application. He believed he had reached the ultimate wisdom, and once he articulated it, his role in the universe was complete.
So for him, the ultimate philosophical certainty wasn't, I think, therefore I am.
No. For Mainlander, it was more like, I know the world is worthless, therefore my existence can now cease.
That sense of philosophical finality provides the gravity for everything we're about to discuss next. Okay, we've established the drama, God chose suicide, and we are the result. Now, we have to move into the anatomy of divine suicide, the engine room, and unpack the complex, deductive logic of why the ultimate being would want to stop existing, and more importantly, how he achieved it.
The logic starts with what Mainlander perceives as the paradox of perfection. If a being is truly ultimate, omnipotent, omniscient, and eternally blissful, it should, by definition, lack all motivation to act, to change, to create.
Right. Why would you do anything if you already have and know everything?
Exactly. Why engage in any dynamic process if you already possess and know everything worth possessing and knowing? It sounds like a direct challenge to the traditional, active, Western concept of God. Mainlander is saying an internally perfect being is intrinsically static.
A cosmic couch potato.
In a way, yes. So if such a being were to act, that single act must logically address the one and only thing it didn't possess or know.
Non-being.
Non-being. Extinction. The very perfection of God demanded his disruption as the only remaining purposeful act.
Okay, I have to push back here a little. Isn't this entirely unsupported? It rests on this huge psychological premise that God was miserable. How does Mainlander justify this specific emotional state for a transcendent being rather than, say, just eternal passive contentment?
He justifies it through the deduction itself. He basically says, look around you. The world exists. It is full of striving, motion, pain, temporal change. If God had been content, nothing would have changed. The static perfection would have remained static. Therefore, the very existence of our dynamic, striving world is proof post facto that the simple unity could not endure its own state.
Ah, I see. The fact of creation demands a pre-mundane motive for destruction.
It's a clever way to turn the traditional cosmological argument on its head. The existence of the universe doesn't prove a happy creator. It proves the creator was unhappy.
Which leads directly into the obstacle to instant annihilation.
Yes, because this is the crucial part of the mechanism. Mainlander posits that while God was omnipotent externally, nothing outside him could constrain him, he was paradoxically not omnipotent internally.
How does that work?
His own perfect, simple unity was the absolute structural obstacle to instant self-annihilation. It was impossible for the unified essence to simply vanish, as the source material quotes. The simple unity was unable by means of itself to cease to exist.
So God could create anything, destroy anything outside of himself, but he was trapped by the sheer impenetrable unity of his own being. That's a truly remarkable theological distinction.
One that traditional theologians often missed. He needed a means to an end. This gives us the creation myth reimagined.
God had to find a mechanism to eliminate this self-retarding element of his own essence.
Correct. The only way to achieve non-being was to shatter his oneness, his simple unity, into time-bound fragments of the universe, which Mainlander calls multeity, or multiplicity. He had to exchange unity for complexity, perfection for imperfection, timelessness for time.
So the shattering is the Big Bang, the distribution of the ultimate power into countless tiny, manageable pieces, each programmed for eventual decay.
Precisely. He constructs a three-step logical progression. Step 1. The simple unity, experiencing internal misery and the lack of non-being, willed its own non-being. This was the free, pre-mundane decision.
The choice was made before time.
Step 2. God's immediate passage into non-being was blocked by the structural obstacle of his own being. He was perfectly unified, and self-destruction requires fragmentation.
Okay, makes sense.
Step 3, the critical move. Because instant annihilation was blocked, it became necessary for God's being to transform and disintegrate into multiplicity, the world of individual beings. And why multiplicity? Because only the finitization of God's being into countless individuals would allow the end of non-being to be achieved through the gradual collective striving of all those finite fragments.
The universe, therefore, is just the continuation of a single, primordial, successful resolution to commit suicide. We are the process of the great dissolution. We're the clock ticking down on the divine corpse.
And this framework immediately establishes the core binary and the hidden mechanism. The binary is crystal clear. On one side, you have the transcendent past simple unity, God.
Inactive, extensionless, motionless, timeless, and most importantly, gone.
Gone. On the other side, you have the imminent present multiplicity, the world individuals, which is full of motion, force, time, and striving.
And what's the rule governing their relationship? What's the hidden mechanism that ensures the universe stays on its suicidal course?
The hidden mechanism is this. The simple unity enacted a single, free, deed self-annihilation, whose continuing, necessary, and gradual disintegration is executed via the striving of individual wills to die, which governs all motion and existence in the world.
So our life, our motion, our striving,
Mm-hmm.
it's just the mechanical means by which God's original resolution to die is being carried out.
Yes, and this mechanism is why his philosophy is called pessimistic pandeism. It crystallizes in his central, inescapable claim. It's the quote often compared to Nietzsche.
God is dead, and his death was the life of the world.
And that phrasing, his death was the life of the world, carries profound meaning. It means the energy and emotion we perceive as life are fundamentally derivative of the absence of God. The vacuum left by the simple unity is what creates all dynamic force.
This helps connect Mainlander to wider philosophical arguments, like the first cause argument. Cosmological arguments often try to prove the existence of a first cause that must still be present.
Exactly. And Mainlander's framework acknowledges a first cause, the simple unity. But then he uses logic to demonstrate that the argument only establishes its existence in the distant past. As one source noted, a mother causes a child but can then die.
The cause doesn't have to stick around.
Right. Mainlander makes that logical possibility the metaphysical reality. The first cause is real, but it is now deceased.
So the universe's purposivity, its entire direction, is derived from this single, ongoing process of forced decay. If God couldn't kill himself instantly, he created the perfect system, fragmentation, to achieve slow, inevitable dissolution.
And the mechanism ensures the entire world has one end, non-being, which it will achieve through the continual diminution of the sum of forces which compose it.
Everything is geared toward exhaustion.
Everything. The movement of the world is not creation. It is the execution of a single, irreversible self-destruct command.
Okay, now we come to section 3, which is Mainlander's true philosophical break from his mentor. The shift from will to life to will to die. This reversal isn't just a minor adjustment. It is the entire foundation of his pessimism.
It is the absolute hinge of the system. Let's remember Schopenhauer's foundational worldview.
Right. For Schopenhauer, life is governed by a blind, aimless, cosmic will to life. This will drives us into endless, unsatisfying striving.
Exactly. We achieve a desire only to experience boredom or the rise of a new desire, leading to perpetual suffering. Schopenhauer saw existence as fundamentally painful because the will is aimless. It just wants to be, without any end goal.
So that striving is the universal cause of all human pain.
Mainlander agrees with the diagnosis of pain, but he completely reverses the intrinsic force. He posits that the will to die is the true, inherited, intrinsic force embedded in every single fragment of God's corpse, in every piece of matter.
Okay, wait, so life itself, the will to life, what is that then?
It's merely the necessary means. It's a phenomenon that emerges only because instant absolute death is blocked by the structural obstacle God built into the universe.
So if I'm striving for a promotion or building a house, that striving is not an affirmation of life, but a detour.
Yeah.
It's a painful, roundabout mechanism set up to accelerate the decay of the whole system that is counterintuitive to every biological instinct we have.
It is. He claims that this will is strictly individual. Mainlander is a nominalist. He believes that only particular, determinate, individual things exist, not some single cosmic will floating around in the world.
So it's my will, inherited from God.
Yes. The will to life, the visible phenomenon of growth and hunger, is just the most effective way for the underlying essential will to die to achieve its ultimate goal of extinguishing its own force.
So how does he apply this will to die to the physical, inorganic world? This can't just be a psychological concept. It's supposed to be a universal law.
He finds it evident everywhere. He explicitly ties his metaphysics to the physical laws that were observable in the late 19th century. He offers specific details. Take gases, for instance. Gases strive to spread out in all directions, to fill any container. He sees this as them striving to dissipate their concentrated force across infinite space.
That sounds like a perfect description of pure, unadulterated entropy in action.
It is. And solid bodies, through gravity, strive toward a center point. Mainlander interprets this as striving toward a singularity, a point where they would theoretically be annihilated, where force is completely concentrated and extinguished.
But since instant annihilation is blocked, they just get stuck in orbits or clumps.
Exactly. They are inhibited from reaching that goal, which leads to the continual weakening of the sum of forces. Mainlander notes that the motion of these inorganic bodies is just a blind will, but its underlying essence is always the will to die.
This link to the second law of thermodynamics, to cosmic entropy, is crucial. He was writing exactly when this concept was becoming central to physics. How does he relate life, the most complex and energetic process we know, to cosmic decay?
He makes a truly chilling direct connection. Life is accelerated decay.
Go on.
Mainlander suggests that the organic realm is the most perfect form for the extinction of force.
Why? That seems backwards.
Because organisms are highly effective, self-sustaining systems designed explicitly for drawing in energy and rapidly expelling it in a weakened, more disordered, or entropic state.
So we're basically just highly complex, self-repairing energy incinerators. We're burning down the house faster than if it were just left alone to rot.
Exactly that. Life speeds up the universal process of decay. The organism, he says, admits chemical ideas, draws them into the maelstrom of its individual motion, and then expels them no longer as the same chemical ideas, but weakened.
So life ensures that this continual diminution of the sum of forces happens much, much faster than if everything remained inorganic and just diffused slowly.
Yes, the organism acts like a massive energy drain on the cosmos, accelerating the universe's march toward maximum entropy and heat death.
That is deeply disturbing. But I have to admit, it's logically consistent with his premise that the universe's purpose is non-being. If the goal is self-destruction, life is just the painful, high-speed mechanism to get it done quickly.
Now we turn to the human condition. In humans, the addition of consciousness, reflection, and refined enjoyments, well, it amplifies the will to life to a staggering degree.
Our minds get in the way.
Our minds get in the way. The human mind is driven by self-awareness and complex desire, which completely obscures the deeper, inherited longing for extinction, the will to die. This cognitive misdirection, this philosophical blindness, creates the internal hell of existence. We are fighting a fundamental, inherited war against our own true cosmic purpose.
Okay, but here's the massive hole in his logic that I have to address. If the will to die is intrinsic, if it's the foundational purpose, why do we have such an overwhelming biological compulsion to survive and, crucially, to reproduce?
Big question.
The big question. Reproduction creates more fragments, more life, which seems to fly directly in the face of the will to die. Isn't that a massive self-contradiction?
It's the crucial tension he must resolve. And Mainlander addresses this by arguing that the will to life and the biological drive to reproduce are necessary evils.
How so?
They are the required means to ensure the overall process of decay continues. The fear of death, which he calls a phenomenon of the mind, ensures the organism keeps running long enough to execute its true task, accelerating force extinction.
So the fear is just a survival mechanism designed to keep the incinerator running.
Correct. The will, as he puts it, loses sight of its end, which is death, and holds fast merely to the means, which is life. In his words, the will has fallen into the world, and in this condition, it can no longer remember what it once willed and determined.
So the fear and the drive to reproduce are just blind biological inertia, serving the greater unseen purpose of total system burnout.
That's his argument.
So if the true wisdom is to pierce that veil, what's the ultimate payoff for understanding this brutal truth?
It leads to what he calls the wisdom. Annihilation is not defeat, it is redemption. And here's the mic drop quote. Mainlander concludes, "Life is hell, and the sweet, still night of absolute death is the annihilation of hell."
Why?
He adds that the only thing which makes life tolerable is the prospect of death. For the individual who grasps this, the pain of striving dissipates because the ultimate goal is secure and guaranteed.
That rigorous link between cosmic decay and individual suffering brings us to Section 4, Mainlander's logic, the escape from puppetry. If life is so worthless, and we are just fragments executing a cosmic suicide, how does he maintain any intellectual rigor? How does he avoid the conclusion that we're just puppets of some present active force, like Schopenhauer's blind will?
This is where he gets into his unique theory of knowledge, his epistemology. Mainlander was absolutely determined that redemption must be based on knowledge, a certainty derived from logic, not from faith. And to achieve this, philosophy must adhere to the ideal of immanence. It must only start from knowable principles within the world, rejecting any unknowable transcendent powers that can't be empirically verified.
But wait, if he rejects the transcendent, how can he possibly prove the existence of the source God, the simple unity, which by his own definition is not in the present world? He has to prove the existence of something that is now absent.
He does this by first detailing the limitations of causality. Mainlander argues that typical causal chains, object-to-object links, A affect B, B affects C. They only ever associate the efficacies of forces.
The effects.
The effects. They track how one thing moves or changes another, but they never contain the things in themselves as links in the chain.
So following the efficient causes of a volcanic eruption pressure buildup, plate tectonics, heat doesn't tell you the cause of the underlying thing in itself that is the Earth.
Precisely. If you rely solely on causal chains, you can never trace back to the ultimate, non-fragmented essence of things in themselves. You can only trace the interactions of their forces. This is why cosmological arguments for a present God based on causality fail, in his view.
So he needs a different kind of chain, a different form of analysis.
Which he calls the power of development.
Yes.
Only developmental chains, tracing the interchange, the transformation, and the degradation of a single thing in itself over time, can logically lead toward the source.
How does that work?
If you follow developmental chains, tracing organic forces back to chemical forces and then back to elemental substances, reason is logically compelled to posit an original source, a perfectly unified, indivisible, simple unity.
So this simple unity must exist to account for the world's original force and the dynamic coherence we see among all these fragmented individuals. It's the necessary logical precursor.
And that is how he answers the question of locating God. He locates the simple unity in a transcendent past.
Not here, not now.
Right. It no longer exists in the realm of time and space. Our entire cognition, our senses, our understanding, our reason, it just collapses before it because it can only be defined by its negatives. It is inactive, extensionless, undifferentiated, unfragmented, motionless, and timeless.
That sounds a lot like what theologians call apophatic theology, defining God by what he is not.
It's precisely that tradition, and this negative definition is crucial because it logically prevents the simple unity from being present in the world. If it had any qualities we could perceive or interact with, motion, extension, time, it would by definition be part of the multiplicity.
Right.
By defining God as completely lacking those qualities, Mainlander ensures God is dead and remains outside the world of constant flux.
This strategic placement, God is dead, is the absolute genius of Mainlander's system because it accomplishes the rescue of the individual.
This is the payoff. By placing the simple unity God in a transcendent past which no longer holds sway, Mainlander removes the central terror of Schopenhauer's system. He rescues the individual from being a mere puppet of a present, all-powerful, blind cosmic will.
So if God or the will is actively willing in the present, we're slaves executing a dictated movement. But if God is dead and only existed in the past, we're just fragments of his free choice.
Our individual power, our sense of self, stems from the fact that the original power source has already committed suicide.
So here's our third audio hook. The reason you have free will isn't because an all-powerful God gave it to you, but because the original God is dead, and we are just the fragments of his decaying corpse.
We become half-autonomous individuals, and this separation is what allows Mainlander to solve the ancient paradox of fate versus freedom.
Okay, so how does he unify these two seemingly contradictory forces? How do you unify freedom and necessity?
Well, our existence is free because we existed in the simple unity when it made its autonomous, pre-mundane decision to disintegrate. We, as potential fragments, participated in that singular great deed of self-annihilation.
But that was the moment of freedom.
That was the moment. However, our paths, our fate, and the movement of the universe now are necessary because the world's motion is the inevitable mechanical execution of that resolution. We freely chose death in the past, and now we're necessarily living out the means life to that ultimate end.
So it's like a contractual obligation made before time began. We all co-signed the suicide note, and now we're legally obligated to execute the will, which is the world.
That's a great way to put it. The separation of the immanent domain, necessity, fate, dynamic coherence, from the transcendent domain, freedom, the autonomous deed, allows him to grant the individual the real individuality that Schopenhauer's monistic system denied.
So the motion we see is necessary, but the origin of that motion was an act of pure freedom.
We are destined to decay, but we consented to the process originally.
That complex metaphysical scaffolding was built to support one thing: the path to redemption and the revaluation of faith. Having established the universe's purpose-total decay in our half-autonomy, Mainlander then moves to critique and synthesize existing religious and philosophical systems. He argues that he holds the ultimate reconciled truth.
Right. He argues that traditional religious doctrines contain half-truths.
Half-truths.
Because they correctly identify one side of the freedom-necessity equation, but fail to correctly place the simple unity. And this misplacement leads to either complete fatalism or complete individualism, both of which he finds false.
Okay, so let's start with his critique of pantheism. Why is that an appealing but ultimately flawed worldview for him?
Pantheism, which asserts God is the world, errs by locating the simple unity in the immanent world, right here and now. If God is currently the world, then the individual is completely non-autonomous.
You're just a tool in God's active present hand, a ripple in the sea of God with no true individual will.
It's a denial of any meaningful free will. However, Mainlander grants pantheism a half-truth. He says it correctly recognizes a power not ruled by the individual, what he calls chance or dynamic coherence.
Okay.
This coherence ensures that all our individual actions combine into a collective necessary movement toward the goal. So pantheism correctly identifies the necessity of fate.
So if pantheism removes the individual's freedom, where does he place the opposite error?
That would be his critique of Buddhism.
Hmm?
Mainlander focuses heavily on the karma doctrine, which he sees as taking the opposite extreme. It asserts the complete autocracy of the individual,
Meaning,
meaning everything that affects me is ultimately my work, determined by my past actions and choices. There is no exterior, overwhelming necessity.
so if I suffer, it's because I caused it in a previous life or a previous moment. Complete individual responsibility.
Yes. And Mainlander grants Buddhism its half-truth, too. He says it correctly recognizes the real power of the individual will, the fact that we have a real, autonomous power not ruled by chance. But it errs by ignoring the necessary collective movement set forth by the original shared choice.
So it fails to recognize the mechanical necessity of the world's decay.
Exactly.
So pantheism sees the collective necessity, Buddhism sees the individual freedom, but they fundamentally blend the immanent and transcendent domains, which makes their systems ultimately false. How does Mainlander's synthesis resolve this without relying on faith?
Mainlander claims his philosophy is the first to achieve this rigorous synthesis through pure knowledge. Because we existed in the free pre-mundane unity, Buddhism is correct that everything that affects us is, in a fundamental sense, our work. We chose this path of decay. And because the whole world is striving toward one unitary goal, annihilation, pantheism is correct that a power not ruled by the individual exists. But the key distinction is that the unitary choice was set prior to the world, and the mechanical execution in the world is carried out by real individuals only.
This means our current struggle and suffering, while necessary for the system to burn out, is also ultimately something we signed up for. It's a brutal form of accountability.
And this leads directly to the secular salvation. Redemption from suffering is not found in faith or heaven or divine grace. It's found in recognizing and embracing the ultimate goal, absolute death.
So the knowledge of the system is the path to peace.
Yes, because once you know the goal is guaranteed, the struggle of the means becomes tolerable, or maybe even pointless. The fear of death, which Schopenhauer saw as the deep metaphysical need of humanity, is simply a veil obscuring our underlying will to die.
The person who truly understands this philosophy achieves the wise man's view.
And this wise person, he says, looks absolute nothingness firmly and joyfully in the eye, losing all fear of death, because death is the fulfillment of the universe's original and ultimate goal. It's the only true form of rest possible.
Okay, let's go back to that critical internal tension we identified earlier, the ethical problem. This is where his system really wrestles with itself.
It's the central ethical conflict, for sure. If life, especially organic life, is the most perfect means for the extinction of force, that is, if living organisms accelerate entropy and decay, why does Mainlander advocate for abstinence, suicide, or philosophical calm?
Right. Shouldn't he, by his own logic, advocate for mass procreation, consumption, and maximum striving to generate more life and burn out the system fast for universal redemption? That seems like a logical consequence. If the universe must die, flood it with life.
Mainlander felt compelled to deal with the individual's role, and his response is complex. It's an attempt at reconciliation. He suggests that the individual seeking wisdom focuses on individual salvation. By practicing abstinence, one redeems one's own type or line of offspring. It focuses on the micro-level realization of the will to die.
So reducing your personal contribution to life is an ethical act of personal redemption.
Exactly. But then he complicates it by also praising the wise hero who creates genuine happiness for others. In doing so, this hero promotes the universe's motion out of being into non-being.
So even positive actions, because they are bound by the mechanism of striving and decay, contribute to the universal goal.
It seems that way. The contradiction really centers on whether one seeks universal decay by creating more entropic life or individual rest by extinguishing one's own will. He seems to allow for both paths.
As long as the underlying philosophy is understood.
That's the key. Mainlander is less concerned with the prescriptive ethics of what action to take, abstinence, suicide, or positive creation, and more concerned with establishing the sure possibility of redemption through death, founded on knowledge. The individual action is secondary to the foundational truth that the universe must end, and the individual knows that the final outcome is guaranteed peace.
We've reached the final conclusion of our deep dive into Philipp Mainlander. We've established that he took the extreme pessimism of his time and provided this rigorous, meticulously constructed metaphysical framework for it. A universe that is the unavoidable consequence of a cosmic suicide attempt, constantly striving toward the glorious final finish line of non-existence.
Mainlander's system is a staggering achievement of philosophical rigor applied to an utterly bleak premise. He answers the deepest human questions about origin, purpose, and suffering by postulating a negative teleology. The universe has a purpose, and that purpose is simply to destroy itself completely, piece by piece, as fast as possible.
So what's the master analogy that makes this whole terrifying system stick? The thing that connects the dead God in the past to the striving individual today.
Okay, think of it this way. The universe is like a massive distributed computer system, the world. And it resulted from its singular omniscient central processing unit that's God running a single, irreversible, complex self-destruct command.
The Big Bang.
The Big Bang. The CPU, in its moment of autonomous freedom, decided to power down forever. But because the CPU's perfect unified structure was the obstacle to instant annihilation, it had to fragment itself into billions of smaller processes and nodes. That's us, particles, stars, everything.
And every single fragment of the world is now running the slow, inevitable process of shutting down completely.
Realizing that permanent power off is the ultimate system update and the fulfillment of the original free command.
We are the distributed software, executing the kill switch across billions of endpoints.
Right.
We are the necessary painful delay before the total power off.
Exactly. And this leads to our final provocative thought for you to chew on, built on the foundation of Mainlander's premise.
Bring it home?
If the ultimate purpose of existence is annihilation, and life is merely the painful means to that end, does every moment we spend fighting for survival, for happiness, for the will to life betray the fundamental inherited purpose of our being? If God already chose death, is our greatest act of freedom not to live, but to accept our necessary role in the universal glorious decay.
Thank you for joining us on this particularly dark journey into the philosophy of ultimate despair and guaranteed extinction. We hope this deep dive into Mainlander leaves you perhaps a little wiser, if not immediately happier.
Until next time, keep questioning the script.